Right. I'm Ravi. I'm a senior web engineer at TANAP. Today we are going to talk about the new Gutenberg experience. So let's take a quick poll before we dive deeper. Can I see the hands? How many of you are developers here? Developers? Okay. Keep them up, keep them up. How many of you have used Gutenberg before? Like developed a block? Okay. I see very less people here. How many of you have looked at the wp.data API? That's very less. So this would be an interesting talk today. This is developer focused, and I would be showing a lot of code examples. I hope that at least some of you who haven't used Gutenberg yet would learn something new today. If you're used to the classic WordPress editor, switching to Gutenberg would be intimidating. Customizing looks really difficult at first. It might look like it's not developer friendly, and oftentimes it also looks like it's challenging and it's not worth the time. But that's not the case. Let's talk about wp.data. Customizing Gutenberg is really easy. It provides the wp.data module. It's under the hood. It lets you share data, subscribe, and trigger events, and it's built upon some core principles of Redux. What is Redux? Let's briefly talk about Redux for a minute. Redux is a popular JavaScript library which lets you manage the state of your application. Now, what is state? A state in Redux is a global object. It lets you keep track of different variables. The three building blocks of Gutenberg, we have actions. An action is a plain JavaScript object with two main parts in it. One is the type, which describes what kind of an action you're performing, and the second part would be additional data or payload. So this is an example of an action. And we have a reducer, which does all the magic. It's a function which would take the current state and action as arguments, and it would return the next state of your app. A reducer would be a simple example would be a user logged in. You perform a user login action. A reducer would take that action. It would add or it would set an additional property like is user logged into true. Now, a store is a JavaScript object which would hold the whole state of the app. This is Redux in a nutshell. So we have the UI, which basically subscribes to the store. It listens for any change events, and then based on the events, it might dispatch an action. An action would in turn trigger a reducer, which reads the action, checks for the different action types, looks at the data, performs some reduction, and updates the store. And that's the whole process. Now let's revisit wp.data. It's a wrapper around Redux. It's also available as a standalone NPM package at WordPress/data. There are three important methods of wp.data. Select, which would let you access the different selectors. Dispatch, which would let you dispatch actions. And subscribe, which would let you subscribe to different events. It also has a registry, which registers and maintains multiple stores. Now, wp.data.select. It requires the store name argument, and it returns all the selectors registered for that store, like wp.data.select core/editor. That's one of the store. There are a lot of default stores which come with Gutenberg. We would be focusing more on the block editor today. Now let's take a look at some code examples. Let's say you want to get the current post ID. It's pretty simple. You do select core/editor and you invoke the get current post ID method. Let's say you want to get the current post object. It's simple. You do core editor.get current post. You want to get the featured image. You do core/editor. You do get edited post attribute featured media. You also have get current post attribute. The only difference being current post would always return the attribute which is saved, whereas editor would return the attribute which you have edited in the editor. Now let's take a look at dispatch. It would again require the same store name argument, and it would return all the actions registered for that store, like data.dispatch core/editor. It would trigger an action, which in turn again triggers the reducer, and it would update the store. Let's take a look at some code examples. Let's say you want to edit the post title. You call dispatch with core editor. You call the edit post method, and you pass an object with the attributes you want to update. In this example, I want to update the title to new, so this is how I would do it. Let's say you want to autosave. You want to trigger the autosave. You do core/editor .autosave. Let's say you want to save the post. You do core/editor .save post. Pretty easy so far. Now let's take a look at subscribe. It will let you subscribe to any change event to the state. We talked about the store and we talked about the UI. This is kind of what binds the UI with the state. You could subscribe to different events and you could make changes to the UI. It would accept a callback function which gets invoked when any value in the store changes. And this is global. This is not specific to any store. So a change in core/editor would also trigger the method. A change in core/edit post would also trigger the method. Now let's take a look. It's pretty simple. You say .subscribe, you pass in your callback method. Now we have looked at basic examples. Let's put select, dispatch, and subscribe together, and let's see them in action. Let's say you want to display a notice to the user if the title has more than 10 characters. I know this is a lame example, but let's just say we want to build that. This is how you do it. You get the title, you get the default title using current post attribute. In your subscribe callback, you're checking for title again, but note that you're using get edited post attribute here so that you would get the edited value. You're comparing if both are equal. If they are not equal, you are setting the title to new title so that you wouldn't trigger duplicate checks. And then you are checking for the length of the title. If the length of the title is more than 10, we are dispatching an action to core notices. That's a custom store which handles all the notices you see in Gutenberg editor. And we are invoking the create warning notice method. We are passing our text or our notice, title is too long, and then we are passing some additional attributes. I'm passing a custom ID here, title too long, and we are bailing out. If the title is not greater than 10, then we are dispatching core notices and we are triggering the remove notice. Note that I'm passing the ID here, title too big. We are not checking if the notice is being displayed. We are just invoking remove notice because core notices already does a job of checking if the notice exists before removing it. This is that in action. So I've updated the title. It's more than 10 characters. I've seen an error. Easy so far? Okay, let's look at more challenging examples. Let's say you have a lot of blocks in all your posts, but you want to translate them into different languages. But your translation API is very expensive. We are charged by every API call, and it gets pretty expensive. So you want to limit the number of calls you want to make. How do you do that? This is one of the solutions. You could do it in multiple ways. You would add a custom UUID attribute to each of the block types in each of the posts. And then based on the custom UUID attribute, which would be unique, you invoke the API once, you get the translated content, you save it in somewhere in the options table or somewhere in the post meta. So the next time you don't have to invoke the API. How do you do it? So we use a add filter one in line 18. Hardeep briefly talked about add filter. This is filters and hooks for the JavaScript. Using add filter, I'm hooking onto blocks.register block type, which is how you register a block. What this does is, when you register a block, you pass in certain attributes like what define your block. This lets you filter on those attributes. So I'm passing in my add attributes method. In add attributes method on line 8, I'm resetting the attributes method and I'm adding my extra UUID attribute and I'm defining it as type string. And here comes a tricky part. I have a can update flag as false. We'll talk about that later. And we have a wrapper callback on post update success listener, which again takes a listener. which is kind of a callback. And it returns a function which checks for three things. Is the post being saved now? Or is it being auto-saved? Or did the last save succeed? If it is not saving, but the previous save succeeded and it is not auto-saving now, it means that the update happened. We have all these checks in place just to ensure that we don't trigger duplicate updates. And then we call our listener function. And this is our listener. To the on-post update success listener, we are passing our custom listener. We have client IDs, which is just an array. And we have core editor.get blocks, which would get you all the list of all the blocks added to the current post. We are iterating through them. We are checking if the block has a UUID attribute. If it does not, we are just pushing it to client IDs. Once that's all done, once we know we have all the blocks with client IDs which do not have a UUID, we are just checking we have something, we are updating, we are setting can update to false. We need that so that we don't recurse ourselves to death. Because if you don't do that, if you just do the dispatch update, it would again trigger subscribe and you would just go into recursion. And we are iterating through the client IDs and we are dispatching update block attributes for each client ID. Client ID is specific to Gutenberg. Each block you add has a unique client ID. And we are updating UUID and we are passing the same client ID itself. After that's all done, we are passing save post. Now because we have set up can update to false, whatever changes we are making here would never trigger our callback again. That would make a default paragraph like this. I'm in Gutenberg, I'm in the code editor. This is how the paragraph tag would look like. That's additional markup which Gutenberg adds. Would turn that to this. We have an additional UUID attribute, and that's the value we have set in the front end. Let's take a look at custom stores now. We have looked at all the default WordPress stores like core/edit post, core/editor, and so on. Let's see if we can register our custom store. We do that using register store. You could add your own store. It would add it to the centralized WordPress data registry. It would take two arguments. The first would be the name, how you identify the store, like core/data or core/edit post. Gutenberg internally uses the same register store method to register all those stores. And the second argument would be an object with the reducers, actions, and selectors. And after the store is registered, you can access it using .select or .dispatch, and you pass in your store name. This is very useful if you want to maintain a custom data store with your own reducers and actions, like you want to build a custom plugin for Gutenberg in the backend. Let's take a look at some code here. I'm defining default state, which is a simple JavaScript object with only items and which is an array. And in my actions, I have two actions, add item and remove item. You could see that they're basic functions. They do nothing. They just return an object which describes the type of the action and any additional payload. It's the same case with remove item. Selectors, this is how you access data out of the store. Okay, I only have one selector, get items, which takes the current state. We do not pass the state. That's something Redux does behind the scenes. When you invoke this function, you only say that get items, and Redux would do all the handling there. I'm reading items out of state, and I'm returning a copy of it. And in my register store, I'm registering my store with the name my items, and I'm passing in an object with one reducer only. But I have a switch case where I'm checking for two different types, add item and remove item. In add item, it's again simple JavaScript. I'm getting the state, I'm making a copy of it, I'm updating the items array, and I'm pushing my item at the end of the array. Remove item, it's the same thing, but instead of pushing, I'm using the JavaScript filter method, I'm passing the custom item ID, and I'm filtering out the items. And we have actions and selectors, which we have defined in the previous slides. And this is how it would work in action. To add an item, you call dispatch, you pass in the object. To remove an item, you call dispatch. You only need the ID when removing, but I'm passing the whole object anyways. To get all items, you do .get items. That's how you register a store, and that's how you could register your custom actions, custom reducers. Now, we have looked at a lot of default Gutenberg stores. Is there a way we could modify existing stores like core/notices, the example we looked at. Is there a way, could we do that? WP.data registry is not exposed globally, and that is for very valid reasons, because we do not want anyone else making changes to the state. Only reducers should be responsible for making changes to the state. It is really difficult to modify existing reducers, but there is a catch. We can actually use wp.data.use, which is meant for a whole different purpose. It is meant for you to add some extra React hooks, but we could still use it to register a dummy plugin. That method actually returns the registry. It might be deprecated in a future release, so if you plan to use it, keep in mind that maintenance could be a nightmare. So use it with very caution. Now, using that registry object, we can access a specific store like core/data or core/notices, and we could replace existing reducers, or we could even add our own. Let's say this is what you want to build. You want to replace the default post updated notice when a post is updated. So that's the default notice Gutenberg shows you when you update a post. Let's say you want to update that using a custom reducer. Because right now there is no out-of-the-box way or no out-of-the-box filter to do it, so you have to do some fancy hacks. Now, I'm registering a dummy plugin in line 2, registry, data.use. I'm just passing some dummy object. The main thing to note here is, after that, you would have access to the registry, and I'm getting the default notice reducer of WordPress using registry.stores, giving the store name and .reducer. And now we are defining our custom reducer function, which is replace notice reducer, which takes the state and action. I'm checking for create notice action, which would be the action type when WordPress creates a notice. And then I'm checking if the ID is save post notice ID. I know this ID because I've looked at the core/edit post save method. That's the notice ID it triggers. I'm specifically looking for that, and I'm finding the index of that notice, because you could have multiple notices, they live in an array. I need to find the index to remove it out. I find the index using the notice.id. Once I have the index, I'm right away updating the content of the notice to post updated, and I've added see it in action. And then I'm doing some fancy stuff to return the expected state the data module expects. And this is the tricky part here. So we have reducers. I did not name it. I just picked it up from Stack Overflow. I know it's a fancy name, but still, what it does is, you could pass multiple reducer functions to it. It would put all of them in a sequential way, so that when you trigger an action, it passes to one reducer and the responding data to the other, and so on. And to the reducers, I'm passing the default notice reducer, which is from Gutenberg, and then I'm passing my custom reducer, replace notice reducer, and then I'm using store.replace reducer, which is again from Redux. What it does is, if you pass a function, it would replace the default reducer, and it would put your reducer in place. And this is what I have in action. I update the post. My post notice has been updated. And that's all the resources. You could look at all the code examples, and you could look at some of the Redux stuff, and you could also look at the source code of data package. That's about it. Time for questions? Any questions so far?